media. My name is Lauren Culverwell. I'm going to be the host for this podcast. I am a third-year student at the University of Pretoria, and I'm majoring in English and anthropology. Political polarization has been a long-time fascination of mine, so I'm really, really excited to get into it. And we're joined by two guest speakers who I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So yeah, go ahead.
Thank you very much for having me. My name is Trevor van Veek. I'm a master's student at the University of Pretoria, and I'm currently studying sociology with a focus in the sociology of COVID-19.
Great. Hi, thank you so much for having me. My name is Sheldon Reed. I'm also doing my master's at the University of Pretoria. I'm doing it in diplomatic studies, which falls under international relations.
Okay, great. So good to have you guys. So we're going to just dive straight into it. Trevor, I was wondering if you could just give us the definition of political polarization so that just all our listeners kind of already have a baseline understanding of where we're working from and what the discussion is going to be about.
I wouldn't say that I have a set definition because I'm sure that there are many academics who have approached this more formally and they have a tight, narrow definition. But I would say political polarization occurs when you have beliefs and political attitudes for a range of topics that are almost represented by extremes, and they could be seen as almost a binary representation. So you get pro-life versus pro-choice, or the free market versus social welfare when it comes to government intervention. So it almost seems like simplistic representations that are also represented by extremes. So I hope that helps, and I hope it could give us some focus for a discussion today.
Yeah, no, completely. I think of it in very simple terms as, a division into two sharply contrasting groups or sets of opinions or beliefs. So yeah, I think that is spot on. So just to kind of like kick off the real meat of the conversation, why do you think polarization exists, and why do you think it's so popular for people to have these extreme opinions, instead of taking more neutral ground?
I think I don't want to sound too sensualistic, but I feel like maybe there is an aspect that should be attributed to human nature. I mean, we are social creatures, and I think within every society, at every point in history, there's always some form of an in-group and some form of an out-group. And because we're living in more complex societies, I feel like there are just going to be more divisions. We have increasingly specialized divisions of labor, specific fields that are popping up overnight. And I think just because we're becoming an increasingly complex society, we're just increasing the scope for division every day. So I think that's a preliminary response that I would provide. But I don't think I could answer that question in the space of an hour or a day.
Yeah, no, completely. And I also think, it's very interesting to me. We're going to get into this later, but I think that social media it's not the cause of polarization. I mean, polarization has been going on since humans existed. I mean, there are lots of academics that would argue that its roots are kind of like in that idea of, almost, and I use this word in huge quotation marks, this idea of tribalism and feeling safer creating an us versus them and having distinct boundaries. But yeah, so there's actually like a whole study done by two amazing academics, and they looked at, on Twitter, and the politicians that have the most extreme ideological positions have more Twitter followers. So the people that are, more centralized or have more views that could be considered middle ground are actually really marginalized in terms of the audience that they have. So yeah, we're going to also just be talking about, do you think that that's a negative thing? Do you think that political polarization is a negative thing? Do you think that it's bad for people to jump to these strict divisions?
I personally wouldn't say that it's negative. What I would say is that specifically because of the platform that some politicians might be using, it may become very problematic. I mean, if you think about Twitter itself, it's very useful in one sense that people who use the platform, they have to get the message across in about 140 characters or less. But that can also be very, very problematic in that it makes it very difficult to get or the picture across to other people. To convey messages, it might be a reductivist explanation. It might increase the spread of misinformation because it might shift the focus or emphasis onto one thing or another. So I think it's about half and half. I don't want to, fall into the relativistic trap of saying that, it's either good or it's either bad. But I think if we look at who uses the platform, if we compare people, you do get a radical politicians who abuse the fact that it's just a convenient way to condense information, and people get addicted to that because not many people have the time to keep tabs on politics. So
Yeah.
wouldn't the most radical politician represent, I don't know, the most extreme views, the information that needs to be seen at a specific point? So that's what I have to say. It's half and half for me.
And Sheldon, what are your thoughts on this?
I think it's definitely a very interesting way to look at things. I mean, if we're gonna start to think about whether or not polarization is a good or a bad thing, firstly, that in itself is entering into a binary, which is polarizing in itself. But over and above that, I think if we were to consider that, you need to look at not necessarily polarization itself, but instead how polarization is used. So as was brought up a little bit earlier when we said that people who take radical or polarized views in terms of politics have, those people will have more Twitter followers, those people will have more followers in general. And I think that the reasoning behind that is because polarization is simple. It's very easy to understand, just like what Trevor just mentioned now about it being, most people don't necessarily have the time to go in and to do heavy research and to read articles and to understand, it makes it a lot easier when it's presented in this simplified way. And I think that the way to most simplify something is to present it as a binary, so that
Completely. And it's like
that kind of thing.
Yeah, to kind of capture something its essence. And I really like what you said. It's difficult to, like even saying, oh, is polarization good or bad? That's jumping to a binary. And I also have a very middle ground. So, I mean, we need enough division in order, like humans need these divisions and these conflicts in order to promote positive change, but not enough to like turn the world in on itself and to create civil wars. So like it's almost like I would say that it can be a good thing because it allows two sides of an issue to be brought together to the table, and it also helps generate new ideas, as I said. And compromise isn't always a bad thing. Sometimes meeting in the middle can help both sides develop their own positions more firmly. But what I've kind of seen recently, and what a lot of other academics have seen, I mean, there was a study done by Louisiana State University and the University of Maryland in 2019, and it was literally saying, like, the question that was asked to the people was, would things be better if large numbers of the opposing parties just die? And like 15% of Republicans said yes, and like 10% of Democrats also said yes. So, I think to an extent, polarization can really, drive innovation and creativity. But I think there is a point where it just becomes so negative. And as we're going to get into it, the sense of outrage, like it really can be something that binds communities together. But at the same time, it also definitely does create an us versus them. So yeah, we're gonna get into this idea of how social media influences this idea of polarization. So yeah, what do you guys think? How has social media spiked polarization? How are these services that have kind of promised to connect the world actually ended up dividing us?
If I could actually just jump in here. Again, please, I don't want to be mischaracterized as a relativist, but I think that social media has maybe just intensified the rate at which people are either unifying or dividing. I don't think social media in and of itself is strictly divisive. And we can look at examples of where this has played out. If people think about the Arab Spring in the early 2010s, social media became a rallying tool, especially against the government. It was about anti-government protests. And in that sense, social media performed a very important role because it allowed people to critique establishment, So social media in and of itself, I think if I could hark back to what Sheldon was saying earlier, it depends on how it's used, explicitly good or bad.
I think that's oh, hi. Sorry. Yeah, I think that's definitely a very good point to make in terms of how the realm of social media sort of comes to shape and affect the the world of politics and the world of how things actually happen, on the ground, on Earth, in a sense. I think that what should also be said about polarization in social media is sort of focusing more just on the realm of social media itself, in that there's definitely an argument to be made that social media in itself is what contributes to the polarization of people and politics. I mean, if we look at the way that these things are structured, we know that we have the algorithms, on Instagram and Facebook and that sort of thing, and these things we need to know are programmed, because the platform needs to get us hooked. We have to stay on the platform. That's their whole business model, and so, these algorithms are programmed to feed us what we want. We very few of us are going to go onto a social media platform and see something that we disagree with, because the algorithm, that's not what it's going to show us. The algorithm is going to show us things that we do agree with and things that we like and things that, things that support our own political views as far as the platform understands. So as much as yes, social media does sort of come with this promise of connecting the world and creating this new, global society of interconnected people and all that, that's grand. But at the same time, the way that it is structured to keep us on the platform, it sort of creates a bubble around us, in the sense that, we become polarized because we only see our own view. We only see, the us. We don't see the other, if we're going to go to those binaries.
So I completely understand what Sheldon was saying earlier about algorithms and social media creating a sort of a bubble around us, and this is something that I've experienced myself. At one point in history, I was abusing Google accounts just so that I could have multiple drives for different reasons and multiple YouTube accounts for different reasons. Sometimes this was actually in the era before Spotify, and sometimes your playlists just don't align. Entirely different YouTube accounts for different genres of music. And one of them was more of a news account. And I used the different YouTube accounts to follow different forms of news, one in America, one in South Africa. And I noticed that the one YouTube account that I was following was specifically related to AfriForum and Solidariteit. So it was very much linked to Afrikaner populism, and the ads that popped up after then, and the videos that popped up after then, it just made it seem like everything that these populist movements were complaining about in South Africa. There was like crime, farm attacks, the EFF rallies, and things like that. Just because it was popping up so much on my feed, it made it seem like it was happening so much more often than usual. But if I had gone into another YouTube account, it would have seemed like it was not happening at all. I was following more American politics. So I think it's very difficult to get a sense of how often things are really happening in the world, especially when you're reading on news, because you might just be seeing repetitions and reiterations of the same thing that you're following, but just it's reported on from different angles. So I think that also might have an effect in polarizing and pushing people to one end or the other.
I think that, that's very, that's definitely a good point, because, it again, it sort of illustrates how our human nature becomes affected by these things. When we see this news, we see these things that are happening, maybe, that don't really even affect us, we still feel that fear. We still feel like we are the ones that are being threatened, and so we want to act on that. And I think that in a way that contributes to the way that we become polarized, in the sense that, I am here, and there is this other force that is trying to attack me, or trying to take away my freedom or my rights or whatever have you. And I think that it definitely does. Like, fear certainly plays a very big part in this. And I think in terms of social media, something else that it does is that it enables like-minded people to come together, in terms of forming groups, or forming chat rooms, or forming social communities. So if we look at things like anti-vax people, or flat earthers, or anything along those lines, it's social media is essentially what enables these people to come together and sort of share their fears, and share their commonly shared understandings of the world.
Hi. First off, I would just like to apologize. My internet did a whole 160 and decided to just stop existing for a moment. So to jump into the discussion, yeah, talking about social media and the creation of identity. I don't know what you guys have said, obviously, because my audio, well, my internet cut out. But I would say that, social media didn't necessarily, it obviously didn't create polarization, but I would say that it definitely increased the flame. And I mean, just to jump in on the last bit of information that I heard from Sheldon, it really did, it did have the potential, and what it did do was it bound all these people, like-minded people, together in a much closer knit group where, communication is instantaneous, opinions are instantaneous. And I mean, even going down to the algorithm itself, the like and the share buttons, we don't realize it, but they can really have an impact on, the ways that we sort of approach these issues, in the ways that we become polarized ourselves. Because at the end of the day, social media is a business. It's trying to present information that will keep us interested and engaged. And the most engaging content is content that triggers emotions, particularly, emotional outrage. So, like, there's a difference between, I think, a healthy level of outrage and, like the super stimuli outrage that is kind of presented online. It gets so bad that, fake news, it triggers these very intense emotional responses, especially, as I said, when the news is fake and you're presented with these fake opinions. But the point is that you're getting so deeply stimulated by these polarized opinions. So moving on, I was hoping we could talk a little bit about TikTok, because we're so trendy. And just how you think that TikTok itself and the way the algorithm is set up, even if you don't know that much about the algorithm, freeball it. How do you think that TikTok has sort of increased polarization?
If I could jump in here. Personally, myself, I don't know anything about TikTok. I get all my TikTok from Instagram, which I'm pretty convinced is TikTok 2.0, because that's where all the reels come from. But I feel like the same principle applies. It's about algorithms, it's about hashtags, it's about what people follow, it's about content, producing content that people want to see and that captures people's attention. And I think that it feeds back into our previous discussion, or something that's been alluded to previously, in that when it comes to polarization, and when we have two contrasting groups with conflicting beliefs, is what we see on social media an accurate representation of those beliefs? Because if we think back to last year with the Black Lives Matter movement, people were rallying across the world. We're not just talking about people taking to the streets in America, but we also saw, like in the Netherlands and other European countries, and South Africa ourselves, we also had a version of that. And we also had protests and social movements linked to gender-based violence. But at the same time, what becomes an issue for me is that I believe that sometimes some movements get overrepresented at the expense of others. For instance, people in South Africa, they were more familiar with what was going on in America and American politics than what was going on in their own
Yeah, definitely.
country. And people fixated on these things, especially when it came to, Trump versus Biden. We had South Africans that were polarizing themselves along the lines of American politics. But if you had to ask them about what the current political climate is in South Africa, they would have a very outdated view, and they would stick to it. And I think that's what the danger is when it comes to social media and polarization. And it's something that has been mentioned before, is that with social media, there's a condensing of information. So people align themselves along simplistic categories. I mean, if you think about just the simple the political binary between socialism and capitalism, you get people who think that America has never in the history of this country applied a single socialist policy. But the truth is, if you think back to, like the Keynesian welfare state, there have always been a degree of socialist policies in place, because that's literally social welfare. It's about taking care of, citizens. But if you had to try explain this to someone else that is not familiar with the sort of history and the getting all the information from a populist politician like Donald Trump, who plays on fear and engages in this positioning practice saying, these are the Democrats, they are trying to take your freedom, they're trying to take your money, they're trying to tax you, they would have this outdated view and a very misrepresented view of what is actually going on the ground. So I think this is what the danger is in TikTok as well. It's because you can watch hundreds of reels in a day, and it doesn't matter whether you immediately identify with something or it is true or not. Psychology has shown us that it still impacts on us, whether we can identify whether information is true or not. It still sits in our brains, it plants a seed. And I think that's what the danger is, because it becomes increasingly difficult to determine what is real information and what is misinformation.
Yeah, and I really resonated with what you just said, about the fact that social media in a way is very Eurocentric. I mean, or even Americentric. I don't even know if that's a word, because there's this fixation on American politics, and there's a fixation on American social movements, I think often at the expense of, local voices that are struggling to be heard on social media. And I mean, like TikTok itself, it does also sort of base what content it gives you on your user location and your language. But the biggest, indicator that it decides, if we're going to give you this video or not, is user interaction. So if you watch the whole way through, so it shows you more and more things that would keep you motivated, engaged. And as we were going back, the more, emotionally triggering or emotionally affirming a video is, the more people will be interested in watching it and watching more like it. So, and also we slowly require more and more to get an emotional reaction. I mean, I don't know if you guys experienced this, and this is a very simple example, but I remember back when I was like 13 and I would see a meme that wasn't even vaguely good, and I'd be like, this is the funniest thing on earth. And now it takes so much, Instagram really has to be doing a great job in order to produce a meme that I'll actually blow air out my nose at. Like it's ridiculous how I think in this process of being, overstimulated and polarized, we've needed more extremes in order to feel something. And that sounds super depressing, but I do think it is. I do think it is the case. So we have briefly touched on, how people formulate identities through the algorithm. But I was just wondering, does anyone have any more thoughts on that? How, we kind of constructed technology and now it's starting to construct us?
I would like to jump in here, just because I would like to bring Sheldon in at a bit of a later stage, maybe even after me, because This is something that I've grappled with myself, and I've been thinking it through. And it is very topical, and it's the question of to what extent should we be policing the internet and restricting people's movements on the internet and the sort of content that is created and that people are exposed to. You know, if you think about Cambridge Analytica and servers in America that track everything about people. They have a virtual profile of almost everyone that has a Google account, and everything is tailored for that specific person. And people have known about the dangers of this for a very long time, in that it can, because certain political ideas or events are overrepresented, because it's tailored for them, it can increase or intensify political polarization and things like that. So I think a very important question is whether it's something that should be formally policed. Should the government step in and say, actually, no, you can't go on this specific platform, or maybe they have a board or a forum that they create where they start moderating posts online and start almost vetting information. So I think that's something that I would like to hear from an international relations student like Sheldon. I'm very keen to hear what he has to say on the matter.
Thanks. Wow, that is a serious question, and like I wouldn't even be too entirely sure on where to start with that. Like the whole question of how we should police the internet and that. I think that it is very true what you say, that there are certainly dangers involved. I mean, with the whole Cambridge Analytica thing that came out a few years ago, you know, it is very true that basically every single act that you do online, whether you search something, whether you Google something, whether you watch something, whether you've commented or anything along those lines, it does still exist somewhere out there. And, you know, there is certainly some sort of database that is put together that holds information on every person. I certainly have no doubt about that. And the thing is that it becomes very dangerous once it has the potential to be used as a political tool. You know, I mean, so I'm going to use the word algorithm sort of as a catch-all term for, you know, the internet and that sort of thing, because, you know, it's easy and it sounds cool. But like if we consider how when we first log on, you know, to the internet with whichever profile that we use, we start to feed knowledge about ourselves to this algorithm, you know, at which point it then starts to generate content that it feels that we will be inclined to agree with, you know. So essentially our thoughts go into constructing this thing. And the problem is that if that system works, you know, in the way that it does, it can also have the potential to work in reverse, whereby the algorithm can start to very, very slowly and very, very subtly feed us knowledge to the point that our thoughts are altered, or that our own behaviors are changed, that we start to see things differently, we start to understand things differently, so that our own opinions and our own, you know, understanding of the world becomes shifted. I don't know if you guys have ever read the book *Sapiens*, or I think the second one is *Homo Deus*. I think they're both written by Yuval Noah Harari. It's, you know, brilliant. He does like this whole. He talks quite a bit about it and how there's so much of a possibility for these things to be used as political tools. You know, against, maybe not against, but, you know, to work in tandem with the population, so that opinions start to become swayed and political integrity comes into the hands of whoever happens to control, you know, the algorithm. I think that it's very hectic. It's very, very hectic, and there's
I completely agree with you, and I think that it's so interesting how we've kind of created a technology that sort of in turn creates us a little bit. And it's so interesting to me how social media, I mean, there's so many different there's a very diverse. It's a very diverse platform, but what's really struck me is that social media also tends to stereotype people. It tends to actually put us in these little categories. Like, I was quite shocked as to, how many TikToks there are about, how certain markers of identity are linked to political ideas. So, for instance, there's the stereotype, conservatives, they hunt and they fish and they wear khaki, and the liberals have tattoos of herbs on their arms. And it's really strange how, our identities have become linked to these political constructs, and how people have really put each other in boxes as to what the other side looks like. And you'll actually find that there's very little crossover between the quote unquote us versus the quote unquote them. And like, before the elections in America, I was actually reading a bunch of articles, and it was speaking about, how TikTok has become more and more political. And there was a very strong division between, the Trump supporters and the liberals. And there was this strange trend where everyone seemed to be doing, like, all the conservatives were doing the exact same content. Like, they were doing, this is how you push a liberal's buttons, or, this is how you're not alone as a conservative. Like, there was a lot of content. In fact, I think the Trump 2020 hashtag actually garnered like over 128 million views on TikTok. So yeah, it is quite crazy how I think social media has become so politicized. And so moving on, we're actually going to talk about this idea that people are working on different sets of facts. So straight up, people that believe in QAnon and all these other things are working on a completely different basis of reality. So do you think that people are working on different sets of facts? Do you think that facts are ever truly objective? Do you think they're very subjective little things? Or yeah, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it.
Yes, if I could jump in here, because this is something that I wanted to actually start off with. I'm very glad you've included the discussion on QAnon and conspiracy theories and social media, and the question of true information or misinformation in general. Because I think, for me, the way I would explain it is that if you're presented with information over and over and over and over again, it feels very real. And because it's such a wealth and abundance of information, it makes it so easy to sort of construct a subjective reality for that person's life. I remembered reading a news article about one guy from QAnon, or he was at least following the discussions on QAnon, and it's linked to a conspiracy theory called the Pizzagate conspiracy theory, which is it's a restaurant chain in America. And basically, the conspiracy went that within these Pizzagate, restaurants, there was a child trafficking ring, and if I had to read through even, most of these QAnon discussion boards, many of them might sound like a reach, but then some of them do sound plausible, because some people go to great lengths to draw up this reality. And what actually happened in the end was this young gentleman stormed into, this restaurant with an AR-15, and he thought he was, going to save these kids. But at the end of the day, it was just a normal restaurant. There was nothing really dodgy or scandalous going on. But I'm sure for that individual, his heart must have been in the right place. He might have been very scared, because it's not something that anyone just casually does. Just take a rifle, and think, I'm going to go save these kids. Who else can I talk to about it? I can't report it to the police because it's a scandal constructed by the elites, So I think that it does become very real. I don't think that we can deny for these individuals that it feels very real. And I think it also becomes a question of, do you think that we should vet people who should be allowed to use social media? Is that too extreme? Because some people might have a larger disposition to believing, information and reacting extremely on the basis of that information. Maybe that is a bit far-fetched to say, and I think the consequences of saying we should vet people and what they can do online or not, that might just put us in an authoritarian political regime. But I still think it's a very important question, that because we know of the dangers of conspiracy theories and we know how fast they spread, everyone knows that common saying that conspiracy theories, false information spreads faster than the truth, and it's by design. So I think it just leads us to a question as what can be done? What can be done about conspiracy theories, QAnon? How do we regulate it? I would like to hear Sheldon's input, not specifically on that point, but in relation to QAnon and conspiracy theories and things like that. So yeah, thank you.
Hi. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks. Thanks, Trevor. There's certainly a lot to be said, and I think that if we sort of go back to the question of facts, is there such thing as an objective truth? Is there such thing, like of facts purely subjective? I think, excuse me, what there is to be said about that is that I don't imagine that it's necessarily a case of whether or not the facts are true. I think it's more a matter of how we sort of have learned to question everything. We've learned to take nothing at all as given. We've learned to instead, I say we, I don't know, general term, use it however you will. But we've learned to call absolutely every single thing into question as a matter of trying to understand things for our own self. Whether it's a matter of fear, whether it's a matter of trust, whether it's whatever it happens to be. I mean, if we take like the Flat Earth Society, for example, the whole premise of that is this idea that science as we are taught, or science as it is presented, is incorrect, it is not true, and whether it be the numbers, whether it be the concepts or the theories of gravity or whatever have you, that this is not true, and instead that the world is constructed completely differently. And it's honestly, it's to the point that I am not even sure if like the flat earth thing is really a thing. Like, I know the science behind it, it makes perfect sense to me why the world would be round and why it has to be round and can't not be round. What does that mean? But rather, so I personally, I can't understand whether or not there really are people who actually believe that the earth is flat. And I think that even that says something about the topic in the sense of the lack of information or the lack of understanding, also sort of to try and understand the extent that this questioning of science and the questioning of the facts and of what we might consider to be quote unquote objective reality. I think it's a lot.
It is a lot. I think it's very interesting what you said about facts. I personally really do think that facts are subjective. It probably is because I'm doing anthropology and we're literally doing a whole module about what is truth and what is scientific truth and how did the social sciences come to exist and how do we know what's true. And there's this amazing quote, unfortunately, I can't remember who the author was, but it said, facts don't speak for themselves. Facts only speak for themselves when historians or, people in charge of creating information arrange them in a certain way and in a certain light. And, in this strange world that we live in, there are far more outlets of information and far more spins on these facts. So to the point where I honestly believe that people are working with completely different ideas of the world and facts. And I mean, Google is even, kind of like involved in this whole thing. If you ask, is climate change real? You will get different results based on what Google knows about you and about, even where you are in the world. So we see that they're completely different worlds and completely different, realities that people are working from. And we also get this false sense that everyone agrees with you because everyone on your feed agrees with you. So For instance, you'd be hard pressed on my Instagram, which, as you know, Trevor was saying earlier, has just become like a TikTok 2.0. I'll be hard pressed to find something that caters to, you know, a more conservative mind. I've got a very liberal kind of feed, so you know, you kind of get this idea that no, this is right and this is truth because this is all that I'm seeing. But I think that in a way, people are working in these strange little bubbles, and they're not really aware of like how drastic the other side's opinions are until they meet them. And then there's obviously this huge showdown, and people ask these questions like, how on earth can someone believe this? And or like, how can someone not see the truth, quotation marks? And I honestly just think that people are not seeing the information, you know, the two different spectrums of like the two different the opposing sides of polarization. I don't think people are seeing the other side's information. And I mean, I think that, you know, QAnon and global warming are really great examples of that. So yeah, why do you think people are so interested in not seeing things from the other perspective?
Oh, thank you. So personally, I think it's a very difficult question for anyone, not just a master's student, but I think if you had asked an academic who's been, you know, following political protest or studying political mobilization or beliefs across a range of factors, I don't think they would be able to provide a straight answer. But what I would like to say is that it leads back to our earlier discussion about information and the fact that it is condensed, and politics in and of itself. I would just like to add that every politician is populist in one sense. I don't think the term populism itself should be restricted just to politics, but I think it's about information and how often it's repeated and a positioning of the other, because I feel like for some positions to have meaning or significance, it usually needs an other to sort of be defined by contrast, you know. And I think something that is also very important is how we're taught to approach knowledge across the various camps and what is seen as legitimate knowledge nowadays. I think a very important idea or phrase that gets this across is the assumption that facts don't care about your feelings. You know, and it's very popular among people who follow what I would say are populist, quote unquote, public intellectuals that are controversial. And there's this idea that, well, if it isn't an objective statistic, then it's not legitimate. And we've got these quote unquote public intellectuals that study public statistics, like especially Ben Shapiro related to crime, and he uses it to combat racial injustices in a public forum, because he says, well, yes, what happened to George Floyd was a bad thing, you know, with the Black Lives Matter movement, but why are we not talking about black on black crime and things like that? But at the same time, you know, there are other ways of approaching this. There are other ways of approaching knowledge, where we could say, well, maybe you're just looking at a dehistoricized narrative. You know, you're looking at racial injustice as something that's only contemporary and something that you're disputing, but there's a whole history behind that. So I think what becomes an issue is that we have so many differing approaches to knowledge, what is seen as legitimate or valid knowledge, that it becomes easy to discount something else as fake news, you know, especially when you are made to feel by your leaders that you are persecuted, like, you know, followers of Trump or Republicans. They feel like a persecuted group in America, even though they are a majority, you know. So I feel like that is an issue. And if I had to sum it up, I would say the biggest issue is that people have different conceptions of what is knowledge. How do we approach knowledge? What is seen as valid knowledge or legitimate knowledge? So that's what I have to add for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I think so. I agree with what you're saying. And I think that, nothing has really impacted the world like social media since the creation of the printing press. And you could even compare those quite nicely because, there's far less work put into producing information these days, just like with the printing press. Because before the printing press, everyone, like monks, would literally copy books, like letter for letter, handwritten. And I think that, you know, as a result of that, I'm probably going to butcher the pronunciation of this because I've only ever read it and I've never heard it said out loud. But the Malleus Maleficarum was a bestseller in the 16th and 17th century, and it literally caused witch burning. Like it was the basis that a lot of people used in order to create this polarization of there's evil and then there's good. And even if you look at polarizations between the Catholics and the Protestants, it shows that these ideas of verbal polarization very quickly turn into physical violence. And I think that really shows up. We were talking about this. Mentioned a statistic earlier that people would far rather that, like, I think it was 10% of Republicans would rather just have that the other side just die, straight up just disappear, which I think it really shows how polarization can be very negative and very dangerous. But enough about talking about the awful, terrible sides of all of this. I would really like it if we could wrap this up by talking about the viable solutions to political polarization. And do people just need more exposure to the other side? What do you guys think?
I would like to come in briefly, but I promise I won't. I will give Sheldon a chance. Again, I don't think we need so much regulation because I think there are also more dangers associated with that when you start thinking about, okay, do we get the government involved? Do they create a specific division or board agency to start vetting information online, vetting social things like that? I don't think that's so much as necessary because there are other costs and dangers involved. But what I do think that people would, or what I do think would help a lot rather, is maybe just contextualizing information, because I think that's the biggest issue that we're dealing with right now, is that information needs context. If you're looking at something on TikTok, much like the case of Twitter, where you're working with maybe 140 characters or less, TikTok is also a very simple template, and templates make information very easy, accessible. It's almost a blueprint for how to think on a specific topic. And that's what a meme is. A meme is a template. It makes information very accessible with little effort, on the part of the creator or the reader or the viewer, the person who's consuming that content. So I think one thing that needs to be done is that within these platforms, certain disclaimers need to be made to say that maybe this isn't the full story, or to read more, and to also get a more representative view. So it's like you were saying earlier about exposing other people to the views of the other camp, and also maybe giving a justification for why exactly they might feel this way. So it's about bringing the extremes, on either end a lot closer together. And I think that's how you combat polarization at the end of the day. I don't know if Sheldon has any other views on how to do it, because I think it's a very difficult topic at the end of the day. So, but I'm still keen to hear what Sheldon has to say.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it is definitely the case, excuse me, where we've all had the experience where, we sort of enter into a situation holding one opinion, and we then find ourselves, exposed to the other side of the conversation. Just sort of, we find ourselves actually learning knowledge and acquiring a bigger picture of the topic at hand. And, we leave the situation with not necessarily a completely different opinion, but an opinion that is changed, sort of an opinion that is more mature, if we want to put it that way. And I think that might definitely be, quite a sustainable solution to the problems that political polarization holds. I think we already do have things like independent fact checkers or things, maybe some sort of a disclaimer. You see it all the time these days on Instagram. I know there were quite a few of them that we would see popping up with like the election and that sort of thing. Last year, the US election. And I think that that's definitely a good place to start, because you kind of subtly remind people that all of the world's knowledge is not necessarily contained within your bubble, no matter who you happen to be, because, we are all affected by the same system that would lead us to believe that, the world's knowledge is indeed contained within our bubble when that's not the case. So I think, yeah, that we definitely need to work on exposing ourselves, or work on exposing our friends and other people to the bigger picture, to actually understand, what is it that the quote unquote other, what do they really believe? Why do they believe that? What is the information that has prompted them to believe that? What is their truth that their facts happen to bear out? And to sort of begin to actually grapple that and to understand it, not necessarily take it upon ourselves to accept that truth. I think that wouldn't necessarily help much at all, but certainly to find ourselves in a position where we can actually understand both why we think the way that we think and why other people think that the way that we think, the way that they think.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, because I was reading a study done by Duke University, which showed that actually the more exposure you get to opposing views, the more it can actually increase polarization, and it actually makes you just double down on your beliefs. And I actually, unfortunately, I wasn't reading it in depth, and I would love to see if they were referring to, are we talking about an online forum, or are we talking about in person? Because I think that, and I mean, I'm sure you guys have experienced this too, people are far more willing to say, hot-headed things on Twitter than they are sometimes in person. It's a lot easier because you're protected by a screen. And also, I think that social media in a way has sometimes allowed people to forget that they're dealing with humans on the other end of the line. Like, these are real people with real emotions and reasons for the ways that they believe that the way that they do. And instead there's there's just this complete divorce online. So I think that rather than, just trying to force your facts on someone else, we really need to be able to listen to the other side, as hard as that may be. I mean, trust me, I am a liberal from a conservative family. I know how incredibly hard it is to have to listen to something that feels so opposed to your reality. But I think that it is only through those kind of meaningful and sustained, compelling conversations that, and also you need to react less. And I think you also need to be a little bit less impulsive. I think social media has made us very impulsive and very reactive, and I think that's something that really fuels the flame of polarization, because the moment that you have a strong immediate reaction to something, the person that you're having a conversation with is way more likely to also just jump to the opposing end of the conversation. I mean, it's a typical example I can think about, because I like to identify as someone who is more, I wouldn't necessarily say socialist, but I definitely lean far more in that direction. And my father is a very strong capitalist, and it's amazing how I found myself like arguing for communism, and my father will be arguing for capitalism, and for some reason I've jumped to this opposing end of the spectrum just because my father's jumped to the opposing end of the spectrum, even though I may not necessarily think that communism is the best way to run society. So I think we also just need to be aware of when we're taking the opposing side, because we've gotten to this gridlock where we feel like we need to strongly oppose, quote unquote, the other. So yeah, just I would love to hear some more thoughts on how you think we should get out. How do we get out of this gridlock in society and both our personal lives? How do we, relate to the other? How do we treat the other in a way that, like, I don't know, lessens the negative effects of polarization?
If I may provide some form of input, again, I think it's about the way we convey information and engage with the other. I mean, if you can have a civil discussion with someone where you make them feel like they don't have to defend their point, like you're just talking through ideas and really trying to tease out what the real difference is between your ideologies. Because I think at the end of the day, some people might be willing to work towards a common goal on certain fronts, and they might not even realize that people get so used to being defensive and defending their ideas. So I think it's another way of opening that discussion and just making it apparent to the other person that I'm not here to attack you. I really just want to see what we can do to find a sort of a compromise. And one of the biggest examples that I could myself relate is that I went to someone who's very close to me. I went to a family dinner with them, and it was the exact same situation as yours, where my friend was more of socialist leaning, and parents very staunch capitalist positions that they adopted ideologically speaking. And when I look at these discussions, there are so many times where I saw a midpoint, that just passed. And it's because they just got so defensive, because, the parents, they were talking about, yes, capitalism can be very bad, but there are good forms of capitalism called like generous capitalism or compassionate capitalism. And I was just thinking to myself, that's like the Keynesian welfare state. That's like the golden age everyone talks about, where the state did support, capitalist expansion and things like that. But there was also a degree of social welfare and, spending money on citizens and taking care of citizens. And sometimes you just see that midpoint that people miss, where they might actually be talking about the same thing, but they just get so used to defending their ideas that it just becomes impossible to reach that point. So that's what I'd have to add to the discussion. It's just about how we engage in conversation with the other and not make them so defensive. So I don't know if Sheldon has anything to add on that point.
Yeah, I think anything that I could say has pretty much already been said. I think it's like what Lauren pointed out earlier on, where when we find ourselves like faced with adversity, we can be like well on some kind of spectral understanding of our own ideology or of the ideology of the other person. But when we come to, when our understanding is come into question, we find ourselves sort of jumping back into the extreme. I think we all sort of do that ourselves. And it really is just more a matter of sort of looking, within ourselves and within our own understanding of the world, and to understand that, it's informed by certain things, and we need to keep in mind that the same idea of the other person is also just informed by different things, and that we should keep that considered. I think that's pretty much really all there is to say about it.
Yeah, and I think to add on to that, I think we have to stop viewing people in stereotypes. We have to stop viewing, a conservative looks like this and they believe this, and this is what they think about me, and this is what they think about this issue. And I think we actually need to take a step back and remember that, even though people may subscribe to certain political standpoints or ideological standpoints, that doesn't detract from the fact that they are a nuanced human being. And I think by looking for the nuance in human beings, we will also help other people realize that they are also nuanced and not just, like these little cookie cutter conservative or liberals. And I think that nuance is a very important thing to keep in account. And I also think, we also have to sort of get off our high horses, and, it's very easy because, no one necessarily, I don't think anyone would subscribe to an ideology that they think is wrong. I don't think people come to believe things because they're like, this goes against everything that I know to be true, so I'm going to subscribe to this. I think people's social conditions really do produce them in a sense. And as we said, like even social platforms can produce people. So we also need to not ride on the righteous high that we know all. And I think that, we really need to reflect on our own cognitive biases and really work at integrating our social bubbles. And this doesn't mean that you back down on your morals or your beliefs. it just means that you're more aware that the other person is a person and that they're not just, your image of what a conservative or a liberal or, whatever the point of contention looks like. And yeah, I mean, also, I know it sounds weird, but you also can't necessarily always just let yourself take the bait, because I think, as we're talking about like these social media platforms, I think that there's so many. Oh my gosh, there's the image of the conservative Karen, and she's this conservative, and liberals laugh watching her scream and throw a tantrum, and then the conservatives love watching liberal snowflakes cry. And it's like, I think it's also, especially people that are highly polarized, often are just looking for a reaction from the other side. I know from my own situation, and from other situations that I've seen, a lot of times the opposite side is just trying to find that stereotype in an individual, and they'll push the individual to try, because we want to make sense of it. We want to make sense of a person. We want to put them, well, and when I say we, I'm also, as Sheldon said, I'm not necessarily calling anyone out, but I'm saying that, it's like our brains want to see this person as an other. So sometimes we go to lengths to try put them in that box. And I think we need to be more open to seeing an individual on their own terms instead of seeing them on our terms, if that makes sense. But anyway, I think that this has been a great discussion. I think we're about to wrap things up. Does anyone have any more last comments or ideas?
Yeah, I don't have anything new to add, really. If I were going to say anything, it would probably be a reiteration of something that's already been said. I think it's a difficult topic, and it can be discussed further, in different variations. There
Definitely.
are 100,000 different ways to tackle this topic. But I did just want to say that I myself, I've developed new insights that have been brought to the table from Sheldon and you, Lauren, as well. But at the end of the day, I feel like it's a discussion that needs to constantly be had. I don't think we can ever put a pin in it and say that it is done. So yeah, if I could maybe invite Sheldon in, because I'm always keen to hear what Sheldon has to say.
Yeah, thanks. Again, I think it is just sort of a matter of reiterating what's already been said in that, if we do really want to be on the on the search for knowledge, then we need to be open to all kinds of knowledge, not just the knowledge that we have a prejudice towards. It is, and I think, not to sort of sound cheesy or cliched, but I think at the end of the day, it really is just a matter of being nice. Like, it's a matter of being kind and being just a decent person who is willing to keep an open mind and willing to actually understand the positions that other people hold. I think that's really pretty much.
Yeah, exactly. I completely understand. We do have to have empathy for each other as humans. Even when there are situations where we don't really feel like we're getting that feedback, because sometimes it just takes you stepping out of your zone of feeling superior or feeling like your opinion is right, and just having empathy for the other side, for that that polarized individual to just realize, oh wow, okay, this is reality, and other people, this person doesn't think the way I think they would think. But anyway, not to just get into a whole other reiteration debate. Yeah, thank you so much for coming. This has been such a great conversation. I'm sorry that there was some technical issues, but yeah, otherwise we will see you guys next month for a new podcast, and thank you for listening to our rambles.